Welcome back to America's Now. Since the United States and Cuba announced they would restore diplomatic ties in 2014, tens of thousands of U.S. citizens have made the trip to the island nation, and many more are on the way. Travel had been suspended between the two countries for 50 years, and there are several things many visitors may not know. Joining me to discuss travel to Cuba is Steve Marshall. He's the CEO of Cuba Ventures Corporation, a company that has been arranging excursions for Canadians and Europeans to Cuba for the past 20 years. Steve, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much.
What have you seen change over the last year and a half? And who's going to Cuba right now? Are they young people? Are they business people? What is the biggest change you've seen?
Well, the major changes are linked to the interest from the United States. Obviously, this is worldwide press now, and we do get a lot of Europeans, Asians, and Canadians saying to us, we want to visit Cuba before it changes. For some reason, that is what people are thinking is going to happen. We're also getting a lot of interest, obviously, from Americans. Our major websites, such as CubanCulture.com, Cubasports.com, is receiving millions of visitors now, and lots of those are from the U.S. We've gone from, in 2014, only about 11% of our visitors on these websites were from the United States, whereas ever since Obama addressed the nation in December 2014, the following 6 months, we saw that increase to 33%. So that's about 10 million extra visitors from the United States. Describe
those visitors. Who are they and where do they come from in the United States?
Basically, it's a broad brush geographic location base. There are a lot of visitors from Florida, a lot from California, and a lot from the East Coast, Washington, New York area. Lots of them are also looking for cultural information. Specific interests such as Ernest Hemingway's time in Cuba. So, it is pretty broad brush.
What kind of money are we talking about here? Do you think that tourism could become Cuba's biggest industry?
I do. I think that Cuba has a lot of facets to both its society and the culture that is extremely intriguing to tourists who are visiting the island. First of all, you have the cultural melting pot. Africans, Asians, Spanish, and then we have that whole period where there was the alliance with Russia. So there are a lot of blonde Cubans, and so that has brought Cuba a very unique culture. Plus, having been isolated, it makes the place very, very unusual. And this goes well beyond the the 1950s cars, which everybody wants to take a ride in one of those. You also have these historic ties, such as the Capitol building, which is a copy of the Capitol building here. So it is quite intriguing for tourists, and they tend to fall in love with the country.
Are other countries in the region, other islands in the Caribbean, are they concerned? Do they see Cuba as a country that will take away some of its business?
The Caribbean Hotel Association, I was at a conference recently, and one of the presidents of that organization was basically saying that this could be a serious problem for islands such as the Cayman Islands, the Bahamas, to a certain extent Jamaica and the Dominican Republic, because their main tourist base is essentially the U.S. Okay, and if Cuba has been a destination that has been prohibited for so long, you have the forbidden fruit concept. And what is likely to happen in those first few years when Americans are able to visit Cuba freely? Are we going to see a mass exodus to Cuba other than the other Caribbean islands? Because if that's the case, then there could be some serious financial downturns for these islands.
Steve, you mentioned challenges on the ground. For first-time travelers to Cuba, what do they need to know when it comes to places to stay, renting a car versus hiring a car, a person to drive you, a driver?
Right.
How do you pay for things? What would you tell them?
Well, first of all, the services that most people will need in Cuba would be divided into two categories. One is if you're looking to stay at a hotel, then the hotel reservation system, especially on our websites, is as simple as booking a hotel here in Washington. But if you're looking at the private homes, B&B, they're called Casa Particulares in Cuba, this is a rapidly growing sector, and it's one that is stimulating the private economy. Cuba has made changes very similar to those made by China about 10 years ago. And so that particular type of accommodation is becoming increasingly popular, not only with people from the US, Canada, and Europe, but also from Asia. And then in terms of renting a car, it's a relatively simple endeavor, but I would prompt people who, especially if they're going to Havana, to probably not rent a car, because there are all sorts of pitfalls in terms of when you have an accident in Cuba, sometimes it's you may have to stay in Cuba until the issue has been resolved, and things like that, quirky things with regard to the law in Cuba, and to be honest, there are so many of these 1950s taxis, and the city is not that large. That it's easier to get around in a taxi. So that would be my advice. And then in terms of excursions, taking people, let's say, to on city tours around, let's say, Havana or one of the 500-year-old cities, like Holguin, or down in Cienfuegos, Trinidad, for example, is a 500-year-old city. You can get excursions either in Havana or in the city that you arrive at, if you're in Varadero, for example, very, very easily from kiosks at the hotel reception.
What about the internet, though? I know that you run websites, but for people who are down there hoping to book things or use the internet, how difficult has that been? Is it getting better? We know that there are some internet cafes, but
right, yeah.
It's not readily available.
No, it's not. Our experience is that almost nobody books anything from Cuba. Most people have their trips well planned, they're booked in advance, and they meticulously organize their trip before they arrive in Cuba. Most consumers are aware that it's going to be tough to get internet in Cuba, and last-minute changes to their travel plans are not going to be simple. Okay, so that is what most travelers to Cuba have as a philosophy. Book everything before I arrive. And, there are some openings right now. I mean, we saw President Obama was just down in Cuba. He took with him the executives from Google. And Google are in the process of setting up some Wi-Fi centers in Havana, in Varadero, and some other locations. So I believe that within the next 12 months, you're going to see a serious increase in the available internet in Cuba.
You said you've lived in Cuba for many years. You were there
years,
regularly.
Yeah.
Is Cuba prepared for the onslaught of visitors from the United States? Are they prepared to handle all of these changes?
Well, the infrastructure in Cuba is going to be problematic. It's obvious. There are only 68,000 hotel rooms in Cuba right now. And so we are seeing an uptake with regard to the private homes, the bed and breakfasts, which are covering to a certain extent the shortfall. But it's going to be tough the first few years, obviously. And I believe that there is some synergy between the US and Cuba in terms of this being a slow opening. I don't think that Cuba really wants this to be sort of everybody can travel tomorrow, okay? Because it's just not going to be viable. There just simply isn't enough accommodation in Cuba. Even if you take into consideration the bed and breakfast, it's just not enough. So I see a gradual change in terms of both the rules associated with traveling to Cuba from the US, but also The Cubans themselves, we've been approached at Cuba Ventures by numerous developers who are looking to quickly become involved in building resort complexes in Cuba. So I think that's the major change you will see over the next few years, just a very rapid increase in real estate development and hotel and resort complexes.
Steve Marshall, CEO of Cuba Ventures Corporation, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you very much.
America's Now.